Cannabis users, hi friends, have I got a message for you? Listen, creative minds deserve creative tools. And Grindini isn't just a grinder, it's a statement piece. Designed for those who care about quality and style, it's perfect for the artist who appreciates the finer things at a very affordable cost. Crafted from high-quality anodized aluminum, and if you're a dum-dum like me and had to look it up, what that simply means that it has a protective layer, Grindini features a strong magnet and rubber seals for a virtually smell-proof design. And the unique curved shape and matte finish makes it as functional as it is beautiful, and it is really cute. I've seen it in person. And you can choose from different colors. You got lavender, forest green. I haven't seen that one, and I would love to see that one because that sounds really cute. Lavender, forest green, or aquamarine. Female founded and inclusive by design, Grindini also gives back. So 10% of its profits support women who have been incarcerated for marijuana misdemeanors. So this holiday season, give your crew a tool that they'll love. And of course, you get a discount if you're a Creative Risk listener. So you have to use code Creative Risk, and it needs to be in all caps, Creative Risk, all caps, for 20% off at grindini.com. 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 Elevate your cannabis ritual and grind in style with Grindini. Listen, I know many of you listening to this have considered getting into voiceover, and why wouldn't you? It's a mobile gig, it's one that's scalable, it's an industry that's constantly booming because of all the, between animation and commercials and audiobooks, it's just nonstop. And so I know you've been thinking about it. And Anna Franco-Duval and her company, Keeping It Reels, can help you. It is a voiceover coaching and demo reel company. So they can help you build reels. They can also do some one-off coaching. They can even help you build your own home studio. Anna has hooked me up. No bullshit. I meet with her every week, actually. I'm not kidding. And she has helped me so much with, because let me just say something about voiceover. I've learned this through Anna. It's one thing to be a good actor, and that is a skill to bring to voiceover. But voiceover is unique unto itself. And Anna has helped me so much in my own discovery of how to develop the actual skill to do voiceover. So I highly recommend you check her out. More information can be found at www.keepingitreelsvo.com. That's keeping without a G, and reels as in real, R-E-E-L. www.keepingitreelsvo.com. And as a Creative Risk listener, you get 10% off any voiceover reel work done by Anna. You can email her at anna@keepingitreelsvo.com and mention Creative Risk.
First off, everyone needs to listen to your podcast. I think you guys are probably my most favorite industry podcast out there, because you guys really teach actors how to actually be entrepreneurs, how to actually market themselves. So I also do feel like every actor should think of themselves as a business person.
Hey all, Mike here. Before we get started with today's episode, I just want to ask you to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell below us if you're watching on YouTube. Or be sure you follow us on your favorite podcast listening app, if that's your preferred way of engaging with the podcast. And if you're feeling extra generous, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We read them all, even the bad ones. So leave a review there. Lastly, if you enjoy Creative Risk and you want to dive deeper, consider joining our Patreon community. We offer 3 membership tiers starting at just $5. As a member, you're going to get early access to ad-free episodes, weekly motivational content, bonus full-length episodes, and much more, including a book club. Come on. But it's more than just content. You'll be a part of a community dedicated to accountability and support, helping you stay motivated and inspired. So head over to patreon.com/Creative Risk Podcast. Check out the description below for that link and sign up today.
Hi, friends. Joshua here, and just Joshua here today. Everybody's favorite on the Creative Risk Podcast. with, well, just me, meaning Sans Mike, but with our guest today, Miss Julia Kennelly, who is a filmmaker and producer. I'm a big fan of Julia Kennelly's. We've spoken with her a couple of times. I know a bunch of people who have worked with her, which is even how she came into my orbit. And we've had a bunch of conversations. And today's episode is going to focus on the independent film producer, so to speak. And while this is what she does full time, many of you have heard us talk a lot about the need to continue to diversify ways to essentially produce your own creative career, aka get out of the mode of specialization and really consider, what that looks like for you, including producing. So for our filmmakers and producers out there, great. This is going to go, you'll probably understand a lot of this. For our creatives, actors and the like, who might be wanting more insight into what it means to independently produce, this is a conversation you definitely want to hear. Julia Kennelly is a filmmaker and producer based in Los Angeles. With a passion for narrative film, Julia has produced numerous short films, including The Neighbor's Window, which won her the Oscar for Best Live Action Short at the 2020 Academy Awards. It's a great film. Other films she's produced have been in competition at Sundance, South by Southwest, Tribeca Film Festival, Outfest, and Palm Springs Short Fest, among others. She is a line producer, most notably on the HBO documentary series The Vow, and she's a co-founder of the production company Dream City and was a 2023 Sundance Producing Lab Fellow and 2024 Film Independent Fellow. She's super smart, super giving, just in terms of her experience and openness, and gets it. I learned, in talking to her, that she has this diverse background, starting as an actor, like many artists tend to, with a focus on theater, having then made her own work, which then became an impetus for her to continue to make her own work as a filmmaker, of which when we get into a little bit, and while we're focusing on producing, I'll say she's a wonderful filmmaker herself. I loved both of her shorts that I watched, Chandler and Marcy Learns Something New. So you should definitely check those out after the conversation, because I just think she's dynamic, smart, has good taste, good advice. She's funny. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. See you on the other side. When I asked you to do this, and I said I was not only taken with you and just your work as a standalone, but our conversation, I don't know, a couple years ago now, that I really appreciated, through our lens of, in a lot of ways, artist sustainability. And you said something to the effect of, well, I'm not quite sure where my perspective, how helpful it'll be in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, would you speak to a little bit of that? Oh, and before you do, Julia, that's super valuable.
Mm-hmm.
It is not always peaches and cream. This industry is fucking traumatic,
Yeah.
in fact, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And for so many artists involved. And so would you speak to a little bit about what was behind that?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I think so for independent producers right now, there's sort of a reckoning happening. And honestly, like producers at every level, it's happening because there has been, in the shifting model of how things get made, like producers have traditionally had this sort of entrepreneurial role, right? So the producers take on a lot of risk by investing their time in something where they're not being paid for the development of this project, with the hope of an upside where they make money in the form of their fee, back end, whatever at the end. And that has just become less and less sustainable as these margins have gotten smaller, as the fees always get, degraded. They don't have health insurance, they don't have all these things. So basically, like, the sustainability for specifically independent producers, but even producers at higher levels, it's become harder and harder to move up and get a more sustainable income in the current environment. And there's been a number of movements that are going on to try to sort of address this. And I would highly, like, just to start, I would say, like, definitely recommend, if people are interested in this topic, to read Dear Producer, which is a newsletter by Rebecca Green, who has been deeply involved in the producers union effort, but also, like, even aside from that, just kind of talking about what are the issues that producers are facing, what is it really that producers do, all of that sort of thing. And also Producers United, which is a separate but sort of similar effort to advocate for producers, and that has a fairly wide range of, like, the kinds of people who are in it. Or some people have been former heads of studios, and some people who have produced maybe a couple features that premiered at Sundance. So there's a wide range of people who are talking about these issues, and I think, yeah, it's a multi-layered problem, but one of the main things is, I think, that people don't really understand what a producer does.
Yeah.
And so they continue to be devalued. And this is a joke that, like, everybody wants the title of producer, right? Like, now when you watch a movie,
Right.
it's like everyone who did any other role in it gets a producer credit.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the lead actress, her husband, who probably, I mean, I'm not speaking about a specific person, to be clear. Like, there's a ton of them. So it's really not, like, if you think it's one person, it's not. But, like, it's like that, her husband, and, like, maybe your husband's a brilliant producer. Maybe he's just married to her. The director, the writer, whatever.
I've been offered things where they're like, and we'll give you a producer credit, So talk about that. What is the role of a producer from your perspective, not just as a bargaining tool?
Well, okay. And sorry, I'm going to answer your question again with sort of why it's complicated, because there are reasons sometimes where there are multiple producers on a project, because it's a wide ranging title and it can be a lot of things. So, it encompasses the creative development. So often, like, a producer may originate the material because they have bought the rights to the book that the thing is going to be based on. They worked with the writer to develop the idea. They brought together the director and the writer and the lead actor and, whatnot. So there's a lot of that work that is the creative development of the script and packaging the project. And that is true at a lot of levels. Basically, like, there's much less studio development happening right now. And so even for studio films, a lot of times these things are coming to the studios, like, much more packaged before the studios are willing to spend money on them. And a lot of money the studios have spent on development never gets made. So there's, like, that's kind of an ongoing issue as well. But so it's that. It would be finding financing. So whichever model that is taking, obviously that is a huge part of the job. And then it's also being sort of the lead communicator with everybody throughout the entire process of getting the film made, from that development stage through selling the film and marketing the film. So you're, communicating with everybody sort of at every level. And that can mean very physical on-set issues where you're, working every day with the line producer about how you're going to afford the lighting package you need or whatever, to talking to the financiers and keeping them happy and informed, or maybe having to explain to them why you need more money from them, or, anything that could happen in that regard. It's being at the monitor and talking to the director about their creative problems that they're having. It's being in the edit and giving notes on the creative there. It's maybe bringing in another editor for 2 weeks to do a polish. It's, making sure every deliverable is getting delivered to your distributor. It's pitching the project at each stage where you're like, okay, we need money now. We need a distributor now. We need a sales agent now, all of those things. It's, the festival strategy, if you're pursuing that route, the marketing strategy. So it really is, like, everything. And that's why I think it's complicated to define. And this is, if you're really interested, there's, like, very deep dives of this, if, like, in the Dear Producer world, especially, where people get into the weeds. But I think this is part of the issue with the title, where it's legitimate to have multiple producers on a project who are all doing a lot of work and are doing different things. And so that's why some of these roles, it's like, a director sometimes is legitimately earning their sort of producer credit. And sometimes some of those things you're like, well, yeah, it kind of is part of the job of the director to pitch the project, right? It's not insane for the director to find some of the financing for the movie that's their dream. Like that doesn't necessarily mean they're the producer. So all of these things are a little bit fluid and it can be hard to define. But I think, there's a number of, like the PGA mark, for example, if you're familiar with the PGA mark? Are your listeners familiar?
Yeah. But explain for them too, because a lot of partly why I wanted to have this conversation is for artists who are interested in producing more of their own work, because I would argue, maybe a macro combo for another time, but there's a real, Mike and I talk about the death of specialization and how artists are really needing to open their perspective of what their skill sets are. So please speak to it.
So the PGA mark basically is an effort by the Producers Guild to protect the title of the producer. It is linked to awards. So a lot of the reason that people want to do it is that they want to be the one on stage getting an Oscar,
right,
if it wins Best Picture. But basically, it's supposed to say this person actually did a certain percentage of these tasks to make this movie happen. And there's this very long, detailed worksheet that you have to do to apply for it. And it also means that your crew, your team will be surveyed. So they will ask like, hey, DP did this. Who was the person that you talked to when you needed more money for your department? Who was the person who talked about this? And so the idea behind it is that you should get a fair representation of like who actually did this work, and they should get the PGA mark, and it is limited. So not everybody can get it. And then people who are getting sort of vanity producer credits because they gave the most money or because they're famous or whatever, hopefully would not be getting it. Obviously, it's still possible to abuse this system because I, personally heard of people calling, like they do the whole process. It comes back and like their assistant got filled out as doing everything for them. And then they're like, do it again. And this time put my name. So, there's a lot of egomaniacs out there. We're not, this industry is far from perfect, but that's the idea behind it. And I think it's a helpful framework to think about, like, are you going to be the person who's going to be making the worst phone calls of the process? That's what I always think about. It's like, are you the one who's going to deal with something that sucks and have to deal with conflict and all of these things? So yeah, but I think but again, I don't want to say it's not that there are some actors and directors and writers and I'm a multi-hyphenate, as we discussed. Like there are plenty of people who do an amazing job at producing, and both tasks can really feed each other. And it's incredibly valuable as an artist to understand this skill set. So I don't want to discourage people, but I think there's a trend towards sort of not respecting the value and importance of the person who is just a producer. And that's vital to this industry.
Super early on in my career, I was an assistant for a producer, and I remember I sat down and I said, so what's your job? Mm-hmm. And he gave me such a simple answer that I think also speaks to so much of what you're saying, which is we solve problems. Wherever the problems are, we try to solve them. Sometimes they're going to be micro, really. Sometimes they're going to be huge. We need more money. We do whatever the hell. Ideally, a producer's there to solve problems. But I do have a kind of an ignorant question. I'm curious to get your perspective. So when those vanity producer titles are given out, why? What story does that tell? Is it, oh, this person was in charge in some capacity? Oh, they helped them. They can claim they made a film. They want the IMDb credit. What is the purpose of these vanity producer credits?
Well, there's also financial implication. And this is the thing about it that I think is to tie into your sustainability question. So the producer, what's weird about producer fees, at least in the film model, is that it's a percentage of the budget. So it's different than any other person negotiating their fee, right? Where there's no like cap on how much someone else is making, but the producer pool is a set amount of money. So the more people that take a fee from it, the less everyone is making. And so that is one big problem, is like, it will be, so let's say, and like, again, there are legitimate reasons to do this, because let's say someone incredibly famous is going to star in your movie and it's like a $2 million movie, and that person starring in it is like the only reason anyone's going to see it. That is valuable. Like, I don't want to pretend that's not important. So maybe You're like, okay, whatever, we're waiving this. But it is tough because you're like, okay, this like multimillionaire is taking this producing fee because we can't afford them to give them the full fee as just an actor. So we have to take it out of this part. And then the person who is trying to make their livelihood in this is walking away with like $20,000 for years and years of work.
Yeah.
So that's a bummer, right? And I think that's one side of it, is like there is a financial implication. And so part of the reason that people get these titles is because they are not being compensated in a way that reflects their value for the other job they're doing because of budget constraints. Sometimes sometimes I think for actors especially, I mean, I would say particularly for women, right? Like women have historically obviously been abused in the film industry. And a lot of actresses, I think, are seeking empowerment both as like business people, in that they are originating material, they are like truly in charge of something, and they're be able to shape their careers. And then also, yeah, having a say and being like, you're not gonna, say I have to be naked on camera when I don't want to be. You know what I mean? I think there's a lot of legitimate stuff in that the only way that they could gain power in this situation was to take on this other role, which again is like not, it's like not fair. Like this is not how this should be. You should be respected as an actor and you should be empowered as an actor. So I think that's part of it. And then some of it is just, yeah, they're like interested in business and they want to take on more ownership of the project. And then it's considered a way to like sweeten the deal for people. I also think because it's so common and popular, then everyone thinks they should have it because other people have it.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, that's partially why I'm asking you, because again, I remember this project in particular, they're like, and I'll get a producer's credit. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, not like that I have a problem with it, but I was just sort of like, well, I just say actually like a better rate, but that's okay.
Right.
You know, in some ways. So, okay. So what sparked your interest in producing? Was there a moment when you were like, oh, I'm good at this and I love it?
Yes. Oh, wait, can I just add one more thing to the last thing before we move on? I will say there's the exception would be like executive producer credits, just to be clear for anybody who's listening. And it's specifically in film, not TV. That's different. But in film, it is totally appropriate to give like an executive producer credit, which may or may not come with a fee, to honor somebody's contribution to the film. So that I think is a totally appropriate thing to say. I want to honor that this person is the only reason this movie got made. Thank you. You are an executive producer on this film. I think that's right. And the reason that we don't use the producer title is because that feels like, again, it's taking away from the actual work that's being done. So that's just a clarification.
No, thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay. To answer your question about my inspiration. So I went to drama school. And at that time it was like High Maintenance and Broad City were very popular, and everyone was kind of like, you should make a web series. You will be the next Ilana Glazer, which turned out to only be true for Issa Rae and no one else. But it turns out those people were really talented and special. Who knew? Not every NYU undergraduate shared their fate. But I was very interested in comedy. And so I was doing like UCB and stuff. And like my friends and I were like, okay, we're just going to like do sketch comedy and web series and whatnot. And, so we did that and we put them on YouTube, and they were not good. But I got interested in this because I was like, oh, I really want to like figure out how to make this good, because I'm really enjoying this process of like doing it. And then that sort of culminated in right after I graduated, I made this quote unquote feature, in that it is 90 minutes long. But we fundraised for like $36,000 to make this and shot it at my high school. And I produced it with two of my friends. And it was that process that I really was like, oh, I'm so happy. Like I love figuring out this stuff and making it happen. And I had no idea what I was doing. And that was really the thing that I was like, oh, this is so exhilarating to be the person who knows why everyone's here and knows why this, we didn't even have a single truck on that, I don't think, but this van knows why this van is here. And and then I really was like, I was like, oh, I want to do this. I want to do film. I want to learn how to direct the camera, because I had a very, theatrical mindset,
Right.
a very actor
Right.
focused mindset. And I was like, I don't understand this medium. So I decided to basically just volunteer myself to produce whatever I could. And it was like people who I knew from the film school who were making their short films, that kind of thing. And then simultaneously, I was able to get a job working for a commercial production company. And then sort of was able to like work my way up on that side of things to actually become a professional line producer in the advertising space. So it was kind of like, while I was doing that, I was also building this community of artists and making these short films together, and built like a little collective of filmmakers that were all collaborating. And I was just really fortunate to have people who I really thought were like incredible artists that I could work with, and being able to, as a producer, like see how different directors approached things, and whether that was like my peers in their 20s who are making their short films, or, really established commercial directors who are 10 or 20 years older than me, and like, how do they approach this? So it was a very educational time. And I think, to your point earlier about what you're saying, like, what does a producer do? Like the problem solving thing, I think it's really, every project is different. And so you learn so much every time you do something new. And I really loved that about it. It's like, you never know what random skills or knowledge are going to come into play.
Yes. That kind of speaks to the specialization thing I was talking about, of like, I think we could all take a page from that book. So are there, I want to ask about consistent themes or values that you might be drawn to in your work, and partially because both in Chandler and Marcy Learned Something New, which are the films that you directed and wrote, and something like The Neighbor's Window. Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, there is the seemingly mundane interrupted by the remarkable. Even in Chandler, which please, correct me if I describe anything, but the story, this girl who gets her period for the first time and then goes home, and at the remarkable, I don't want to give away the movie, you should watch it. Mm-hmm. There's this remarkable moment with her sister's guy that she's sort of seeing that I would describe as remarkable. Mm-hmm. So for me, that was a theme for me. But are there any specific themes or values for you, excuse me, that you are attracted to in the projects that you choose or create?
Well, I think I would say I have two different buckets in terms of, I think, the projects that I write versus the ones that I produce. And I think part of what I'm attracted to in projects that I produce is that there's something I would never write. Like I love to produce for artists who are different than me, and be able to contribute to their vision and their work. And it's not that it's not that I couldn't produce something for someone who's more similar, but I enjoy working on things that I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I would never have written that, like there's something about that that's really special. Yeah. So as a producer, I'm much more open-minded. I think it's really about connecting to the material and the person, and like, the person is so important because you spend so much time together and you will go through the ringer with this person, like even on a short film. And so it's like, you really want to know, this is someone who I can handle disagreements with and it won't be miserable. This is someone who is going to value the artistic integrity of the project, but also cares about their collaborators and is like, not someone who's just going to take everything for granted and be a huge nightmare, which many people unfortunately are. So
listen, I always talk about how intimate these relationships, just creative relationships, a business you're starting, a creative project going on, it's as if you're dating somebody. So this really does matter. Sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely. I totally, and it's like, it's not, there are jobs that I did when I was younger. We've all, like, I think anyone who's worked in the entertainment industry for any length of time, at some point you have like incredibly exploitative job where you are like, wow, this person is really crazy and I am killing myself every day for this. Right. And I think that stuff it just teaches you so much about what are my values, because you have that experience. And then the converse, when you have a boss who you really respect and who is not that way and who makes deliberate choices to not be that way and to always be fair. It's like emotions are going to run high, bad stuff is going to happen, people are going to make mistakes, but you can choose to be fair and, treat people with respect. And I think that is that's the key difference. So I would say, anyway, so my values in terms of producing, it's like, it really is both. It's about the material, but it's really about the person. And it's someone I would enjoy spending time with and think, all those things. And I'm going to support in their lowest moments, because I think the thing about being a director and being a writer is you understand, and like for being an actor as well, even though I have left that behind, it's like, you're so vulnerable because you're so self-critical, and you have to battle these demons of self-doubt. And I think that's where understanding that mindset to be a good producer is to be like, how can I support this person who is really going through it with the weight of this creative project on their shoulders? So I think that stuff is important too.
Well, that was one of my questions too, was if there were, from your perspective, any specific skills or traits that you think are essential for a successful independent film producer. And one of the ones I would argue that you just named is empathy. As an example, in terms of the people you'll be working with and knowing then subsequently how to navigate. But anything else that comes up for you there?
Well, I sort of a joke that I'm like, good producers are either masochists or psychopaths. And it's like, I don't choose the psychopath route, but like, it's there are people who are good at it because they just don't care. Like, they're like, I don't care. I'll do whatever it takes. And the masochist is kind of like, I'll do whatever it takes, but like on me, which also is not super healthy. Like, I'm not suggesting we should be that way. Hopefully we come to a balanced middle, but yeah, it's like, I think you have to be a little like crazy in terms of thinking through what could happen and what can go wrong. And you have to have a really low tolerance for things, leaving variables open, because bad stuff will happen if you don't control it. Like, I really think that's like a big thing, especially when you don't have a lot of money. It's like, you have to be like, how much can I control the situation? And if something is not controllable, what am I going to do if it doesn't work out? And I think that's like just something I've seen. It's like, do you trust if you order something on Amazon same day delivery that it's going to arrive? Like, it might not, right? You know what I mean? Like, we've all done like, that's a stupid example, but it's like little things that you're like, where are these variables? How can I do this in the right way that this dumb thing won't be an issue, right? Because there's so much more that could be an issue. That's a big deal. So I would say like, it's like never, I don't know, you do have to be a little bit crazy in how much you care that things are going to be done the right way and done correctly, and always be learning from people with more experience than you, because we always, like, as we get older, there's things that you're like, oh, I've gotten away with this in the past and it was fine, until you've had that experience where it's not fine, or you learn because somebody tells you, do not risk this, I promise you it's not worth it, and you actually listen and you don't do it. Right? Those are the two ways that you learn.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you prescribe to this, but we don't really learn from successes. I'm not saying that we shouldn't want things to be successful, but we learn from failures, A. But B, I want to get as a question to learning from others with more experience. How have you put yourself in situations where that has been afforded to you?
Well, this is where I think it's really valuable to work in jobs where you're working for other people. And I mean, you have to do both, right? It's like, you have to have that sort of, again, entrepreneurial spirit, doing your own thing, stepping into a leadership role, or else you'll never get that skill set where you're the person in charge and you're making decisions. But it's like, I think there are a lot of people who, they don't, like, if they don't come up under somebody or like under multiple people, they kind of don't know, they don't have those people to ask who are mentors, and that's like, it's so valuable to have that. And so I would just suggest for anyone, like, I mean, if you want to make money, like, you need to do something other than independent producing, obviously. Like, so like, you have to make money somehow. And I would really suggest doing it in some way that is ideally working for people who can teach you about this, because it will really inform you. And then that's a network you have for the rest of your life, and you can lean on them, which has been so important for me in my career. The people who took a chance on me and like hired me when I was younger, and I've been able to maintain those relationships, and they've been incredible.
Yeah, finding those mentors.
Yeah.
You participated in the 2023 Sundance Producers Lab.
Mm-hmm.
So, people get excited about this. I don't really know much about the lab. What is the Producers Lab, and how was the experience for you?
It's wonderful. I highly recommend. I mean, yeah. So short answer, absolutely. It's incredible. The people who run it are incredible. If everyone should apply. You basically, like, the way it works, you apply with a specific project. So you are the fellow as the producer, but you have a script and a director attached, and you're in the process of trying to get it made. And the program is officially a year long, but it's like unofficially continues until you get your movie made. But also, really, it's just like a way into that institute community, and then you're a part of that forever if you choose to remain engaged with it. And so the year is that you start with a week in person, which in my year during the strikes, we didn't get to do some of the programming, but traditionally it ends with meeting a bunch of industry. But that one, it's in Utah. Maybe it will be somewhere else now, but regardless. And it's this intensive with advisors that are always at a round table. And so it's you, your other fellows, there's 5 people, and then the Sundance staff. And so you all sit at this table and you go through like every step of making a movie throughout this week, where you talk not only about sort of what this means in general to do whatever the step is that you're talking about, but also specifically with each of your movies. Project. And I think that's what's so valuable, is like you really get into the weeds of like, everyone has read your script, everyone has read all your materials, they know what your plan is. And so all of those advisors will say, okay, well, so given your budget, you have this attachment, this is what, your financing plan should be. Like, it's very, very tailored and very specific. And I think that's what makes it so helpful. And also, like, they will share. It's really hard to find good information on the internet about this stuff, because there really isn't much, which is, I assume, part of why you do this podcast.
Yes.
It's like there's a lot of people on Reddit who say dumb shit that is just not true about the film industry. So it's very hard to find good information and also truthful information. Like, if you Google a film budget, it's not true. Like, people don't, all this stuff is really confidential. And so I think it's like, you won't actually know what happened or why this movie happened the way it did unless you talk to the people who worked on it, and they will share that information with you in that setting, or again, outside of Sundance, if you can build a relationship with them otherwise. But it's really, like, to me, what it is it's more about this community that's amazing of people who are passionate about independent film and also share a set of values and ethics around independent film, because there are a lot of, again, like, pretty unethical people out there. I feel like I'm hitting this so hard of like, there's monsters lurking, but there are a lot of people who do bad stuff in the film industry. So you really want people who are going to teach you how to do things ethically. And that doesn't just mean, like, of course it means not mistreating your cast and crew and all of that, but it also means, like, how do you deal with financiers? How do you know who is a good financier? Who's kind of a criminal? It's like all of these things that are like, all create a whole that either can go well and fairly or can go really horribly wrong. So I find that part to be super valuable.
How many times have you thought about taking voice lessons or guitar lessons or piano lessons? For those watching, you can see my piano behind me. It's been an important buoying of my own creative career, so to speak. But even if you're not someone looking to take lessons yourself, if you know little ones who you are interested in gifting some lessons, or a family member or a friend, we've got you covered, because Lesson with Luke is offering something special to Creative Risk listeners. And Lesson with Luke, which is a collective of teaching artists who specialize in private music lessons for students ages 3 and up here in New York City, are offering a special 30% off your first 3 lessons with them if you mention Creative Risk when you reach out. All the teachers at Lesson with Luke feature real pros, folks who have appeared on Broadway, off-Broadway, national tours, regional theater, television, film, and I know I said New York City, but they also offer virtual sessions over Zoom. And all the teachers at Lesson with Luke bring a sense of joy to their teaching style, helping install that love for music that we all, I guess, have, and we won't even know how much we might have of it until we've worked with Lesson with Luke. Reach out to Luke directly at lessonwithlukestudio@gmail.com. That's lessonwithlukestudio@gmail.com, and mention Creative Risk in order to receive your first 3 lessons at 30% off. Enjoy, friends. Go make music. You know, we've been working on an episode for a long time, really, all about making art at this point during late stage capitalism, and even to your point about the lack of blueprint, I think, meaning in the arts there is no one way. There is very actually bizarrely little structure too. It's like it's all kind of made up. And so to your point about mentors, because I would argue that the Sundance Lab probably afforded some new relationships and important mentorships there, highly competitive. Like Cameron Morton, I think is a mutual friend. That's how and I think she just did it too, or I can't.
Yes,
I know
she was in my cohort.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, okay, amazing. So, highly competitive, and so therefore, like you're getting that sort of specialized, focused, true information. Per your point about weeding through the bullshit of what it means to be making art right now. Let's talk about financing a project. So obviously, a lot of especially independent films are operating on super tight budgets. Macro question, what is your approach, in your opinion, to financing a project?
Well, I think it's a lot about knowing. I mean, okay, I guess the short answer is your film will get made for the lowest amount of money that it can be made for. So I think the role of a good producer is to understand what that number is. And that depends on a few things. It's like, I think there's a trend right now to make super micro budget movies that then don't get seen, And I think there's like some benefits to that for the filmmaker because their movie has gotten made, but nobody has seen it. So I think that's where you're like, okay, it was worth it to do this because otherwise this movie would not have gotten made at all.
Sure.
Therefore, it is better that it exists.
Sure.
But then I think there's also some things that I'm like, I think this project was just kind of underdeveloped and maybe it could have been made in a way that was a little more, that being better creatively, more eye-catching, all of those things, right? So it's like about assessing where does this thing fit, and given that, what is the minimum? So that's also why, like, taking on financing a movie, it's a big deal because you have to form relationships with these investors that ideally will last beyond just this one film. And so it's like, okay, what am I giving them? What is their return? Because knowing even in success, often that is not a significant financial return.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, it's probably either, ideally they make their money back. Maybe they lose some of their money. Maybe they make a little bit of a profit, but why did they want to get involved in this? And what do they love about it? And so, for a lot of people, that's like, they want to support artists. They want to go to Sundance. They want to see their film win awards. And they're aware that the financial upside to that is limited, hopefully, which again, as the producer, you should be, honest about. Like, don't like, I think the thing with financing is there's sort of always going to be a crop of new film financiers who have never done it before, who are more persuadable potentially to invest in things that are less financially sound. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because in my perspective, it's like, well, yeah, some movies are not going to be a hit, but they're still worth making, right?
You don't think it's a bad thing that they take risks on those movies, or you don't think it's a bad thing that essentially, maybe, this is my words, people play on their inexperience in order to get the funding?
Yes. So exactly. I think that the difference is the first one, it's not a bad thing that they're willing to take risks, but as the person who is benefiting from that risk, you want to make sure that they are clear-eyed about it and that they're not being sort of swindled. You know, like, it's like, you want to be like, yeah, like, it would be awesome if this makes its money back. Here's our strategy for the best path that we think we can get it, and here's why. But be aware that it's possible we will not, and here's all the benefits that we can get from making this movie, even if it doesn't totally recoup. And I think that's where it's like, the difference in a good relationship is that person feeling like they were communicated with clearly, that they bought into it for a reason. And, you know, also, if they're newer to film financing, they're probably used to investing in things that are much more likely to make them money, right? Because that's how they got the money that is now being frittered away in the world of independent film. So it's like, the life of a film and its recoupment schedule can be very long. You know, it's sometimes like the best case scenario for indie film, right? It's like, you make it for $1 million, you sell it for $3 million at the festival. Great. They have made their money back. Everyone's happy. They've recouped. But it's like, maybe you sell that movie for $200,000 at the festival, and then your recoupment is now taking place slowly over time with the back end of the film, which is going to take a really long time, because, I mean, I don't know how much people know about this, but it's like, basically, like, a lot of other people then get paid out first once you pass that first sale. So, but that's like, maybe they're fine with that, and then maybe they do make their money back in 10 years.
You know, one of the things that I just want to really underline here is the long game nature, specifically of the relationship piece of working with financiers, because everyone's looking for something different. Community, accolades, being close to the artists, who knows? That's part of what the gig is, right? When you're asking for money, what does this person want? But that you're not just going to meet someone on the street and be like, hey, you're going to fund my movie. Sometimes these relationships might have to be cared for over time. And that's the other thing that I hear you saying that I think is really valuable. Be honest, be communicative, right? And essentially try to play the long game with these, what we always refer as like a circle of financial backers, right? So that they trust you, because I'm a big believer that fundraising is friend raising. I do believe that people give to people, not to the project about their Aunt Lily who did some incredible thing. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, do you agree with that?
Yeah, of course. And also, like, people, in most of the time, people who can afford to invest in film have, you know, a level of sophistication around both financial giving and investing, right? And so they are, it's not probably, even if it's their first time investing in film, it's not their first time making a financial decision like this, you know?
Right.
And so it's like, that is something to remember if you are not used to this and it feels like weird to ask people for money. It's like, that's what they have to give, right? Like, that's their thing. Their thing is like, I have money, I choose to invest in things. That's how I support it. It's like a vital part of this ecosystem. And so you just have to get comfortable with, like, what am I offering this person? And this person is, like, excited to be a part of this community and to be part of this film. And they are contributing something that is very important, and you're contributing something that's very important. And that's kind of how you're coming together. It's not like, you know, oh, I just have to get them to trick them into giving me this money, and then, like, I'm good to do my thing, you know?
Do you know Anne Bogart? She she created City Company SITI, and
Yeah.
so I'm a big Anne Bogart fan, and she wrote a book called "And Then You Act," and the subtitle "Making Art in an Unpredictable World." I actually used to carry this book around with me in my backpack, and this is so crazy. But one day I ran into her in a PAX when PAX was still around here in New York. And I was like, oh, Miss Bogart. And I brought my book out and I was like, will you sign it for me? And it was just kind of a crazy moment because she also was like, why is this random boy holding my, book in his backpack? But it meant a lot to me. And there was one section where she talks about fundraising and she says, I view fundraising as part of the creative process because every time I make an ask, it is an opportunity for me to clarify why I'm even doing what I'm doing and its value. And it's always just stuck with me because fundraising is hard. We all know, what money means in our own lives, which has hills and valleys. And sometimes it can be tricky to go out on that limb and to ask someone to believe in what you're believing, especially, and I hear this a lot, I'm not sure if you have an opinion on this, but from a lot of artists, even if they don't name this, I know that this is kind of what they're speaking to. When someone says no or expresses disinterest, I think sometimes it can underline the either imposter syndrome or fear that we have around the value or lack thereof of our art and purpose. Does that feel true to you too?
Certainly. Yeah. And I think it's, I know, but it's like, if we didn't have that, then we would just be insane. You know what I mean? It's like, because it's like, most people are not successful at this, right? So you if you have to have at the same time, have this delusional kind of belief in yourself. And at the same time, you have to be like aware that you're like, this is really hard, right? Like most people do not succeed. So I have to be constantly evaluating, like, why didn't this succeed? Was it something that I needed to change about me or my project, or is it just not right for this person? And in anything like where there's a lot of rejection, it can be hard to evaluate that because like acting, where you're like, okay, you're going to audition for so many things that you're not going to get, that is not a reflection on your value as an actor. But at a certain point you will feel that way because of course it could be like at a certain point you're like, well, maybe I am just bad. and that's the mental terror. But I think with a film, it's like, the circle is much smaller because if you're just doing one project, right? Like it can be harder to get a temperature. If you have a few projects that you're going out with, you can see trends and you can see people will respond in ways that can help you to understand why the other one maybe isn't succeeding. And I think that's what's helpful about it.
Julia, what I would argue that you have naturally though too, and even in all of that, what's clear is a growth mindset, being able to like take a look and be like, oh, well, why did that thing not work? And how can I apply it moving forward? And that I would argue takes a certain level of the ability to self-reflect and have some skin that allows you to deal with the shortcomings as well. Just to say, I want to go back to team building because you were talking a little bit of this earlier about when you pick projects, what attracts you to them. What do you look for though when you are assembling a team for a project?
Well, I think so. I guess, yeah, like, again, this is sort of different as a producer and as a director, but because as a director, then I am choosing just like, for me, kind of like, it's like, if I'm a director, I'm like, well, I know that I'm just basing this on who I'm aligned with creatively for this part and who I'm aligned with, personally. And it's like, I'm like, great, I can just do everything myself. The theme of this podcast, Julia loves to be in control of things. But yeah, as a producer, it's like I'm providing options to the director that I think will support their unique personality if they do not have somebody that they already want to do that role. So it's like, for each head of department, it's like, I'm like, okay, who do I think will work with this person well? Like their personalities will mesh, maybe will support an area that they're not comfortable in. And also, with the rest of the crew as well. So it's like you want to ideally create a team that everybody feels good about each other, that you're all doing the same thing, and especially because I'm doing a lot of like first time directors or less experienced directors than their crew. It's like, who is going to be the right fit where they can communicate well with each other and no one's going to panic and no one's going to be like, well, this director's an idiot, so I just have to, because that happens, because some directors are idiots, unfortunately. Sorry to directors, but it's like
and or Julia, I will say, I'll never forget this. I shot an episode of a TV show called the director of the episode that I was in, an amazing woman, but I just want to, you're making me think about this. This was her first time directing. She'd been a DP for a long time. She was given this opportunity, and look, we were very behind schedule. Mm-hmm. The script was not great. The writers weren't on set. She was trying, and listen, in my opinion, she was handling it with so much grace, and one of my new favorite words, aplomb. She was so lovely, but the crew was horrible to her.
Yeah.
They were making her life hell. And I was shocked because she was and when I wrapped, I'll never forget, she texted me like hours after, and she was like, thank you so much. Like, she was really trying. And I was so taken aback at how much I might even cut this because now people can go find. I just realized
just redact the name of the show.
Yes. No, thank you. I gotta take note of that.
Yeah.
But thank you. 47 minutes. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, but I was so shocked at how horrible they were to her, because I heard from someone, they were like, oh, well, this is her first time directing. And that, to me, like, we could have helped her more. The crew could have been there for her. Is this kind of what you're talking about, too? Scenarios in which people, like, for some reason, spit venom at people who might need more support than others?
Yes. And I think that's where, again, as the producer, ideally you can set people up for success. And like, it means, choosing someone who's going to have patience, but also then as the producer, if you are more experienced at being on set than the director is, guiding them a bit. So if you see them doing something that you're like, this is rubbing people the wrong way, and they aren't aware of it. Like, the thing is that a lot of times they're not aware of it. So like, one thing I feel like, I was just having a conversation with someone about this the other day. It's like, directors who are too green, who are like too thankful to people for just doing their jobs. And it actually is like taking away, because they're feeling like they're trying to compensate for the fact that they're like, oh, I don't really deserve to be here, is what they're feeling. And then they're like, oh my God, I see the crew is working really hard. And I don't know if like I deserve that. And whatever. And it's like, I think there's a professional way to approach that, which is to very much value what the person is doing. And the way to value what that person is doing is to do your job. Like, if you're the director and you see this crew is working super fucking hard for you, then it's like, yeah, you should be prepared. You should be ready to answer their questions. You should be able to make decisions. You should ask them if you don't understand what they're saying, right? Instead of like being like, oh no, like, I feel really bad and I'm unsure. And so then because you're unsure, you're either going to like lash out or be too apologetic. And it's like, they don't want either of those things. They just want you to be able to do your job. And then you need to know, okay, do I have a decision? Do I need to ask them another question? Like, how can I get them what they want, which is to be able to do their job effectively and with minimal headache back and forth over time, all that stuff, right? And I think that's where a greener director messes up, but with good intention. Like, I think it's like a lot of times they have good intention, and so they're trying to be like thankful, trying to be apologetic. And I think the right crew for that kind of director will give them a little grace and like be like, okay, I know what they're doing, but also be like, okay, this is really annoying. We need to work on how we're communicating about this, so it's not wasting my time. And I think that's where, as the producer, you and your first AD hopefully as well, like that you can kind of help guide that person and be like, okay, like, this is what this person wants from you in this relationship. Here's how you can step up. Here's how they can step up, right? Like, that's kind of
how valuable you must be. No bullshit. Meaning, because you have this theater acting background that then you translate into some of self-made work that then led to you producing more and then making, writing and directing your own films. Like, you really must have that perspective that I would argue would give a director, especially an early career director, a lot of confidence. And just to say, I say our because Cameron, Mike, I think you met was it with Teach that you, I don't know, the School of the Arts world, that's we're little community. And the new film dean, who we actually hosted her, Michael Calciano, my partner and I, hosted her here last week, Deborah Levine. She's the new dean of film, but she comes from the theater world. She's directed theater pretty much her whole career, and started shifting when she took over the CalArts directing program, and then started getting into more film herself, and now is running the film school. Why do I babble on about this? Well, I just think that there is a lot to glean and learn from those like yourself as well, who have those multiple crossover points and aren't necessarily myopic in any one direction. And especially as a producer, it has to give you a huge leg up. Would you say that's true?
I mean, yeah, maybe. I think producing, it's such a holistic job. It requires you to understand so many things about like how the world functions. I think any experience you have in the world is really helpful, because you have to deal with so many systems as a producer. Like you have to deal with like legal systems and
unions,
business systems, and import export systems. Like it's like all of these labor laws. Like there's a lot. And so I think that the more you can understand how the world works in a logistical sense, and then also understand the heart of creativity, and then you can help, like you're trying to marry these two things and be like, how can I make this serve this?
Yes. Yes.
And so I think that's where, yes, absolutely, the theater, like to me, it's like the theater, it was a very purely creative part of my education. And it was really about like, what is the heart of a text? What is the heart of an emotional state? What are the limits of your imagination? And I think that, so bringing that to the sort of harsher realities of the logistics of film is what I love about producing, because you're like, okay, I see this is what we're trying to create. How can I use what I understand about how the world works and how these logistics work to support
and
that?
let's look at an example of that, because I think that is a special skill. So how do you maintain that balance, right, between a director's creative vision, this is what I want to make, but also let's say the goal is to make the project commercially viable one way or the other. Mm-hmm. How do you ensure that you do that while balancing that vision?
Well, I think this again goes back to, and I say this as like someone who also is trying to direct my first feature. So just like recall that as I will talk about this in this very like confident way, but I also like am learning. So,
yes.
But
fake it till you make it. That's the name of the game. Okay, Julia?
Yeah. But direct, like it's much easier. The more experienced the director is, much, much easier, because when someone is doing something for the first time, it's like, I have to listen to what they're saying with the grain of salt of like, do they know what they're saying?
Yes, right? Yes. And also try to be respectful and not be like, I don't really know what they're saying. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And like, and that's where I think especially my commercial work, or just, work with people who've been doing something for 20 years. And then they're just like, they're still going to run into problems, but they aren't as unsure about what they want. And so that makes it much easier. And I think directors, like, so the thing with working with like early career directors is that you're trying to help them figure out what their vision is. And you're saying like, okay, you wanted this, we can't afford this. What is it about this that's actually important to you? And the better they are at directing, the better they are at articulating that. And they can say, well, I really know I need this. Like, this is what it's about. And this part we can sacrifice. And that's like, again, where the partnership, as both of you grow and are better at your jobs, it's easier to find solutions together, because then the director will understand more about the logistics of filmmaking and the producer will understand more about the logistics of filmmaking and the creative. And you can kind of be like, oh, this is how we're going to solve this dissonance between what you originally wanted and what we can achieve in a way that serves this story.
Is there a specific moment, or are there any moments when you had to make, for example, a tough call that ultimately then shifted the artistic direction of a project?
Yeah. I mean, let me think about let me think about what's a good example. Okay, I have something to say before I'll still keep thinking of an example, but I think the other thing is like so much of this is about prep, because ideally the better you are at prep, the more you can pre-solve these problems before you're getting to the moment on set where it's not working, right? And again, you can never 100% do that, but the more that you like have thought this through earlier on, the more you can pre-solve, because like, for example, if you can still change the script, it's like, great, like we can still change this in a way that is more creatively fulfilling, you know, than if you like get to set and then you realize like, oh, this isn't working. It's much harder to solve it. And in the edit, even more so. So I think it's like the prep is about that. And like, a lot of these things I think are solvable the earlier that you realize you have to fix them. And so I'm like, me thinking about this, I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of things where I did kind of weird creative solutions to things because we were able to talk about them before we got to the day. And that's about, yeah, just like correctly anticipating what the problem will be. I mean, a lot of it is like knowing, I don't know, it's all about like time and money. Those are always the problems.
And there's never enough of either of them.
Yeah, there's never enough of either of them. But then it can sometimes create cool things. I mean, it's like, I don't know. Okay, I think like one thing that's interesting that you will see as the producer, like, because as the producer, you're always like, all right, I'm just presenting what the problem are, and here's the possible solutions, and I'm going to let you choose, right? That's like all you can do, and you can offer your advice, but ultimately it's always about what do you choose. And I think this is a sort of banal example, but it happens all the time where you're like, okay, we're not going to make our day. We need to combine shots. We need to cut shots. And it's like watching the DP and the director when they are really locked in and they are like, yes, like I can do it in this actually really like elegant way. Or when they're like, we cannot cut this. If we cut this, it will ruin the scene. And I know that is true and they're right. And then you should not make that choice. And you're like, okay, we're going to suffer the consequences of, you know, paying for overtime or whatever. But I think those are the things that it's like knowing, it's like watching people who really know versus watching people who are like really just scared. And then they're like, well, I'm just going to panic and cut it. And then you get to the edit and you're like, oh my God, like this whole scene doesn't work because we don't have this shot. We should have just paid for 30 minutes of overtime because the movie's ruined, right? It's like, those are these things where it's like making those calculations is what you get better at over time. And it's a lot of these decisions are kind of little things. Like they don't seem, it's like, of course, it's like the big scene of extras or the house is on fire or whatever, the obvious expensive things. But I think so much of this comes down, especially in indie stuff, to these like small things about like how much are you correctly envisioning your edit at each stage of the process before you get there, and how good are you at like understanding what you can sacrifice and what you can't.
Which again, you know, comes from experience, and it's so funny, right? Because you hear people go, as you're working on your first feature, you'll hear people go back and forth on the value of shorts, right? As we speak to an Oscar-winning Julia Kennelly for her short. But if nothing else, and actually, I just want to say something, just my opinion. I one of the reasons I personally hate the stress put on first features, people's first features, is because fuck that. Let people just make things and make it wrong and bad. It doesn't have to be the one and only, because this is, I would argue, the value of shorts, right? Where you can understand and see where each stage will be, so that at your point about prep, like you just said something really interesting. When you're in that moment of like, we're behind, we've got to combine some shots here. How can you cut in your mind to that editing process and go, okay, but what is that going to be? Is that going to be what I need it to be? But that's only going to come from doing that. You can't really just get ahead of that. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about doing it, and it's about having participated in each step of the process. Which is why I personally like hate post. Just like it's incredibly vital and important. Like it's not like I don't respect it. It's just that like I find it emotionally torturous, and I think the reason is because you're confronted with every bad decision you made. Like post, it's so painful because you're like, oh my God, this is it, right? I have to fix this. And I think you no longer have illusions of like, well, what if it goes differently? Because it's there.
That's it.
Yeah. But it's like, the more you do that, then the more you understand about it. And that's where also, again, listening to, DPs and editors do this more than directors do, because no one is directing as much as the crew is working. Right. And so this is true of like every position, but it's like, they know more what the consequences are if of like cutting the shot, because they're like, well, I do this every single day and I see how it works out. And you as the director probably don't, even if you are a commercial director or whatever, you just don't work as much as they do. So that's where I think leaning on your crew is really helpful. And
I would argue, going back to that point about the team that you build, especially, I don't know if this is true for you, but if you were working with an early career director, you might want a DP who's experienced and also could help guide the director a bit where need be as well.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. And then even actually going back to what we were talking about with theater and stuff, and it's like, depending on where you come from, like directors have different primary strengths, and some people it's like really about actors and performance, and some people it's really about the camera. And obviously, ideally, as you progress in your career, you're trying to marry those two things and get better at both. But I think that's a big thing with like, if you don't understand, and that was for me when I started doing this, that was part of what I was like, that's why I need this education of producing and like figuring this out before I could direct anything. Because I was like, I know I don't understand the camera. And that is what this medium is. So it's like, even as much as I'm like, now I understand a lot more than I did before, I'm still like, when I'm collaborating with the DP, I'm like still going to express my desires in a emotional way, and they're going to translate it to a technical way, like for me. And there are other people who will be like, no, I want this lens. I want this exact camera movement. This is what it is. And that's like what they do. So I think that's also part of it, is being like, okay, is the way that I talk to this person about their technical expertise, or is it I'm communicating to them in an emotional way and they are translating that into the technical choices that they're making? And then obviously you react once you see it, but it's like that. I think that's where the partnership, you understand like what is the language you need to share. And I think a lot of misconception amongst directors who do not have a camera background, it's like, yes, learn about lenses. Of course, you should learn about that. But like, don't expect that just because you've watched some YouTube videos about it, then now you have to tell your DP what lens to put on every time. Because if you don't know, then like they should make that choice. You know what I mean? And then you react and you're like, oh no, that's not what I wanted. That's not what I was seeing in my mind. But I think that's important to understand, like, what's your strength, what's not. And same with actors. Like, I feel like there's this tradition in film school for some reason of like teaching film students about how big film directors in the past would like manipulate actors into performances, which I'm like, why do we keep telling people this? Anyway, whatever. But it's like, and then for those people, you're like, no, that's not what you need to do. You need to just like talk to this artist about the character in the moment and like communicate with them and let them do their job.
But again, this is where that perspective, it's like what you're saying, like, why I would argue like part of what you bring is just is probably a bit unique to the industry, because you've come at this from so many different sides and probably can have a language that can translate. Have you, and you were kind of speaking to this maybe at the very beginning, have you noticed any significant shifts in the landscape of the industry? And what are those shifts and how have you adapted as necessary?
Well, okay. I mean, I haven't really worked in TV, so I'm not going to talk about TV. There's obviously like an immense TV disruption going on right now.
Okay.
But I feel like that is less relevant to me at this point in my career. I mean, I would say, I mean, the past 2 years have been crazy. Like, I think I think the hardest thing everyone is dealing with right now is like, when is the sun going to come up and how much? And I think, and I mean, amongst the many, many worse things that will likely be a part of this incoming administration, we're probably going to have more like corporate consolidation in Hollywood, which is also bad. Like, right?
Yeah.
So I think, so we'll see what that means. But I think my thing is like, I don't need to solve every problem in this industry. I just need to focus on trying to make the things that I care about. And part of making the things you care about is being aware of what's going on. But it's like, you don't need to, like, I'm not like burying my nose in like Deadline and Puck every day. You know, it's like, I think I'm kind of like, I need to just think about what is the path for these projects that I care about. And for my particular stage in my career, because I'm like, I can't know what's going to be happening outside of that. So I would say to people like, you know, yeah, it's been really difficult to make money on independent film recently. It's just really changed in terms of like, you used to be able to turn a profit on independent film for a variety of reasons that we don't need to get into too much. But basically, like, that's very difficult right now. So it's not impossible, but it's difficult. And so being aware of that, it's like, okay, I need to make a really strong case for why someone should invest in my film. And then also when it comes to releasing that film, I need to think about what marketing strategies worked, what didn't work. Like, why am I having to personally text the director of a feature film being released by a distributor in order to find out when it's playing in my city, which is Los Angeles, like not a random city, you know? And I'm like, that's a huge problem, right? That should not be the case. This film should be advertised to me, the most motivated possible person to see it, because I literally know the people doing it and I'm like the exact demographic that they should be advertising to, right? So I think things like that, it's like being aware is what's going to empower you to champion your own things. So I think, see the failures of other things so that you can try to avoid them and not be like blindsided. But also, I think we can't be disheartened by the fact that everyone's going to say it's really hard. It's like, well, it's always been really hard. Corporations have always been greedy. Like, it wasn't like in the 70s, Hollywood was run by a bunch of like awesome guys who just wanted to like support artists. You know what I mean? Like, it was like people were successful despite these companies always, I think.
Yeah.
So I think we just have to trust that like people still care about art, and they will, if it is served to them in the correct way, they will appreciate it. And that's what I believe anyway.
Well, but you brought up another point, and I guess this is a question. What advice would you have for producers sort of trying to make sure that their projects stand out in an incredibly saturated market?
I think, well, some of this is beyond our control, right? I think the timing of projects is beyond our control because it's so hard to get a movie made. It takes such a long time. It's like you can't really control when it happens. But maybe being aware, if you're like, this thing is really not going to be successful right now, maybe like, let's like see how things are looking in 6 months. I think that could be something that's worth doing. But yeah, I mean, I think so you're asking this question as far as like when it's released to the public, right? Like how it stands out to the public.
Yeah, exactly. How do you distribute it in a way that's going to get some actual attention?
I think get realistic about other movies that are the same scale as your movie, and think about like how many movies by first-time directors made for under $2 million did you actually see in a theater in the last year? And like what was that box office like? And where did it end up on streaming? And did it get pushed to anybody on streaming? And I think so like being aware of that, whereas like mostly you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people who worked in this industry didn't see those movies, right? Like it's like, I think, get realistic, and then you have to get hyper targeted and be like, okay, now I'm free because I understand that unless I like shoot the moon, my movie is not going to be number one on Netflix. My movie is not probably going to have a more than a 1 or 2 weekend theatrical run.
Mm-hmm.
How can I find the people who are going to love it and like really target them? And I think that's like the key, is like, be like, actually get specific about your audience. And if you're just like, my audience is like women, that is not specific enough. You know, like I think like create like some advice that I actually got that I thought was really good about this and like thinking about distribution is like, imagine literal characters of people who would like your movie, and like
Avatars.
think about what do they do, what do they like, you know, and really get, and then you can be like, it's better to have a small but dedicated group of people who actually care and are going to tell their friends to watch this movie because they loved it.
Yes.
You know, than just technically be on a platform, but that's not like pushing it to anybody. So, you know, a lot of people are getting very creative with self-distribution. Like I'm curious to see what happens with Willow, which is a new distribution company, and like how people are finding the best way to serve their film. And like, obviously, you know, A24, Neon, Searchlight are incredible at marketing these films, but at the same time, like if you're their least favorite film, you may not get, you know, you won't get the treatment that their favorite film is getting that year. So like maybe you would be better off actually being with a smaller, more dedicated company. And also specifically, like if your film is about any kind of underrepresented community, do not underestimate how much people will like not take that into account. It's like they will really be like, let's just do the sort of most mainstream version of this thing. And if you understand like the people this is really for and like it's really about, you'll have to fight to get it to them. And like that's an unfortunate truth. It's like a lot of these companies pay lip service to caring about that stuff, but they may not really. And be like, yeah, you know, like I think about where the film festivals are that the people who really care about this might see it. Think about the places that they live, all that kind of stuff. But it's hard. I mean, it's like we all want to not have to do that. Like that should be the job of this of the marketing department of your distributor. But I think it's important to be like, no, I gotta think about it for myself if you really care about the movie, because it's tough out there.
That late stage capitalism. Okay, 2 more questions. One is a surprise that I should have told you about before. But the first question is, what are you most looking forward to as part of the future of the industry and even your own work and career?
I'm most looking forward to the people that I will get to meet and work with. And I think that is like, it's so inspiring to be around people who are truly masters of their craft and have this wisdom and experience. It's like, it's the best, you know? And it's like that every time that I've gotten to work with somebody who's like a legend in what they do and you watch them work, it's the best. And I think that's what makes, you know, if you don't love the process, right, you're not going to survive in this. Like you have to love the process. And to me, that's what it is. It's like getting to level up in my career. What's so amazing about it is you're like, wow, I get to like work with this person. That's amazing. And I think that is what I most look forward to.
Okay. So my last question is, and this has been wonderful, Julia. At the end of every episode, we do what we call comfort food performances, which is basically, Mike and I have different interpretations of this. I basically think of it as any performance I've liked recently. And Mike thinks of it as more of like what an actual comfort food performance really would be, which is like something you could return to back time and time again. So we're going to name our comfort food performances if something comes to mind for you. And I'll start since I didn't even give you advance warning. I recently rewatched Vera Drake, and great film, but Imelda Staunton. I mean, it's kind of, again, it's a little obvious, but and it was a long time ago, 20 something years ago. But I remember seeing that movie then and thinking how amazing she was. And I recently rewatched it, and it's just a devastating, simple, complex, true lighthearted while being so achingly painful performance. So Imelda Staunton and Vera Drake. Does anything come to mind for you?
I love Lost in America. I feel like that movie, it's like one of those movies that I didn't see until, I mean, later in life. I'm 32. Later in my aged life.
Yes.
And I think like it's because it's really like very simple. Again, like it's the kind of movie that I feel like now they'd be like, this isn't totally developed. Like you need more. And I don't think it does need more. Like I love when the movie ends when it ends. It's like, it's really about marriage. It's about loving someone else. It's about sort of the foolishness of thinking you're going to have this better for your life. And then being like, actually, you know, it was at home all along. It's kind of like a Wizard of Oz story in that way, you know? And it's so funny. The performances are so good. It's also, if you've ever worked in advertising, it's quite funny because it sort of rips into the advertising industry. And yeah, I just think it's sweet. It's like, it's hard to find those sort of like, I think a lot of people now are making movies that are sort of like supposed to be in that vein. If it's like about marriage, it's like, it's got to be devastating. It's like, you've got to Virginia Woolf it, which is a wonderful, obviously, work of art. But I'm like, you know what? Sometimes it doesn't have to be that.
100%.
And it can still be poignant and wonderful. So I love that movie.
I would argue that's we want to avoid the Virginia Woolf of it all if we can possibly.
Yeah.
I directed that play like 7 months ago. That was a beast.
Yeah.
Julia, thank you so much. You're wonderful. You know, I'm a super fan. So thank you for this and for giving so much insight that I think it's like what you said. It's not all Googleable. You know, it's not like how to be in it, but that's not really how it works. AI is not going to help us with that. So thank you for sharing your time. And where can people find you and anything that you have upcoming that you want to briefly chat about?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Kennelly, and I have a website, which is juliakennelly.com. And those are the only things that I have.
Great. Keep it simple.
And yeah, my upcoming projects. Well, I have 3 features that I'm putting together. One is my Sundance project, which is also an adaptation of a short, which you can watch online, called Claire by Lauren Minerath, the writer and director of that. And then I'm also working on a feature that I will direct, which is an adaptation of Marcy Learned Something New, also available on YouTube and Vimeo near you. And then the last one is called Public School by Ali Avital, who is just an incredible director. She's done all kinds of music videos for, you know, Olivia Rodrigo and the Yeah Yeahs, and she's a great commercial director. And she has such a wonderful writing voice as well. So I'm very excited about all 3 of them.
I love it. And I really love Marcy Learned Something New. Rachel Fetch. It's amazing. So hopefully she would reprise. Anyway, thank you so much, Julia, really.
Thank you. This was so fun.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to this episode of Creative Risk. If you've enjoyed, please don't forget to like, subscribe here on YouTube, follow our channel, or follow us on your favorite podcast app. A quick review on Apple Podcasts, like we said, would mean the world to us. We read them all, as I said. And if you want to go deeper, join our Patreon community starting at just $5 a month for exclusive content, motivation, and a supportive community. Check out patreon.com/Creative Risk Podcast, and we'll see you next time.